Masechet Sukkah, daf 37. We continue on the theme of what to use to build the Sukkah, as well as the holding all the lulav and the tzog and everything together. And then we're going to get into the next Mishnah about the details of shaking it. So we left off with Rabbi Yehuda. He is of the unique opinion that when we build the Sukkah, we have to make the sechach out of not just any material, but it has to be out of the four minim, lulav, hadas, adavot. That's what you have to use. And we have a question to Rabbi Yehuda. Mi amar Rabbi Yehuda arba'at minin in midya harin ala. Is it really true? Could Rabbi Yehuda really have said that you can only use the four minim for sechach, but not anything else? V'hatanya. Sikkecha b'nesarim shel erez sheyesh behen arba'at tefachim dibra kol pesula and behem arba'at tefachim Rabbi Meir posel v'Rabbi Yehuda machshir. So this is a braita that we saw earlier in the Masechet that if we take boards of wood made out of erez, erez we think means a cedar tree, and if they have four tefachim, if they're four tefachim thick, and then everyone agrees it's no good. If it's less than four tefachim, machloket. Rabbi Meir says no good because if using board, that's building material. Rabbi Yehuda says it's okay because he says sukkah dirat keva. And so yes, you can use building material that looks kind of like your roof. However, Rabbi Meir agrees that if you space them apart, you put a board, and then an equal amount of regular leaves, and then the board, and then branches and leaves, then that's okay. We explained that case already, according to Bimir, that maybe it's on the side and dofen akuma. Anyway, the point here is that Rabbi Yehuda thinks that if you use a board made out of erez, meaning cedar wood, that is kosher sechach. So Rabbi Meir, how could you tell me that I can only use the four minim when this baraita says that, according also to the Rabbi Yehuda, that you can use a plank of cedar wood? So that's the question, and the answer is my erez hadas. And when we say erez here, that is in fact referring to a board made out of the trunk of a myrtle tree. Because there's 10 different kinds of cedar, and one of them, 10 different kinds of arazim, and one of them, the usual one we think is a cedar tree, but the truth is, it can mean a lot of different things. How do we know? Shene'emar, eten bamidbar, erez, shita, vehadas, and so on. There's a pasuk from Yeshaya. It's talking about in the future, Hashem will come and help out Israel and help them grow, and he's going to bring it back to the land, and the desert is going to be full of water, and in fact, Hashem is going to make grow in the desert, and then the pasuk mentions 7 different types of trees. And interestingly, they're called erez. They're called erez, and one of the things, the subcategory of erez, is a hadas. So now we know that hadas, a myrtle tree, is in fact a subcategory of erez. So in this baraita here, where the Rabbi Yehuda says you can use a plank made out of erez, it didn't mean cedar wood. What he actually meant is a plank made out of a myrtle tree. All right, now next topic. Rabbi Meir omer afilo b'mshicha. We saw machloket in the Mishnah. According to the Rabbi Yehuda, you have to tie it, and the tie has to be one of the four minim. Whereas Rabbi Meir says, no, you first of all, you don't have to tie it, and when you tie it, if you want to tie it, you can use anything. And we have a braita that tells a story. Tanya amar Rabbi Meir. Maaseh b'yakirei Yerushalayim shayu ogdin et lulevehen begimoniyot shel zahav. Amru lo misham raya v'mino hayu ogdin oto melemata. This is a braita that is almost the same word for word as the Mishnah itself, in which Rabbi Meir says, I have a proof that you can tie the minim with anything, because after all, here it says Yakirei Yerushalayim, the important people of Jerusalem, rather than the Mishnah, just as the people of Jerusalem. So maybe that's why I brought this braita to specify that it's even a greater proof, because this is the great men of Jerusalem, the prominent people, and they used to bind their lulav together with strands, with golden rings. And gold is not one of the four minim, as beautiful as it is, and yet they did it. Therefore, that's a proof for Rabbi Meir's opinion that you can use any material to bind them together. However, they replied, that's not a proof because they would use one of the minim, they would use a lulav leaf first and tie it together. And then on top of that, they would add some decoration. But the decoration was there just really for an ornamentation. It wasn't actually the binding that holding it together. So if you want to add on top of that, you can. And therefore, it's not actually a proof for the bimir. So you have to look carefully what was underneath those golden rings. And that would be the subject of the machloket between the Yehuda and the Meir. Here's some advice that Abba said to the people, the growers of the Hoshana. We saw before, the word Hoshana comes even because we shake the lulav when we say Hoshana, then the word Hoshana comes to mean the lulav and the arba minim. So those who grow the Hoshanot, meaning the lulav and hadas and so on, of the resh galuta of the exilarch. Here's some advice. Ki gadlitu hoshana de beresh galuta shairi bet yad ki hechi de la teve hasisa. What you should do is when you bind it together, you should leave some space so that you can hold it. In other words, the resh galuta is very rich and important, and it would be very decorated. He probably had gold and whatever else covering the entire lulav, so much so that you wouldn't be able to see the lulav itself. And then if you held on to it, you'd be holding the gold or the ornament, and you wouldn't be holding the actual lulav. So his advice to him was, leave a space in the middle that's bare without any ornamentation. That way, when the person holds it, they're holding the lulav itself and not holding it through something, because otherwise that would be chatzitza. Chatzitza, similar to when you go to a mikveh, that you have to make sure don't have anything directly on your skin. Your skin is directly touching the water. So too, your hand should be directly touching the lulav. Okay, so don't go overboard on decorations. Rava Amar, Rava, however, disagrees with Rabba, his teacher. And he says, no, if it's a decoration, then it's not considered a separation because you only put that gold there to beautify the lulav. It's not a separation. It's integrated as part of it. You want it to be there, and therefore it's okay. Also kind of similar to some of the laws of mikveh, where if there's something that is there and you want to be there, it's also not chatzitza, right? It becomes part of your body. So it's going to become part of the lulav. Good. Next advice. So this, the first advice was to resh galuta. Now he's saying to anyone, when you hold the lulav, don't hold it with a cloth. Like if you're wearing a glove, or for whatever reason you want to hold it with a cloth, maybe you don't want to get dirty, or you don't want thorns in your skin, don't hold it in a cloth, because you have to take it lekichat tama ulkach tem. You have to take it itself and only it and nothing else. So now you're going to add something else, and that would be an interposition, an addition that is not needed and therefore not allowed. Rava Amar, Rava again disagrees. Lekicha al yedei davar acher. He says the taking, even if it's through another object, is considered taking, even though I'm taking it, not holding it directly, but holding it with something through a glove, it's still considered taking. I am taking it. In a way, in that case, you could say the cloth is like an extension of my hand. It's part of my hand. Just like a decoration, gold decoration is part of the lulav. So Rava thinks that that's okay. And Rabba thinks that it has to be direct contact. Amar Rava, Rava says, I'm going to bring a proof that in fact, even taking something by an extension is considered, according to Torah standard, to be taking. How do we know? Ditnan. This is a Masechet Para regarding Para Aduma. Ezov katzar mesapeko bachut ubakush v'tobel u'ma'aleh. When you're dipping the Para Aduma ashes, you need to take a bunch of Ezov, and you have to dip it in, and then you sprinkle it. Now, let's say the Ezov is too short, and you're trying to stick it into a cup or something, a thin glass receptacle, and you can't get down to the bottom. This is, like the baby medicine when you have the squeegee and you can't get the medicine that's way down at the bottom. So there's no problem. All you have to do in that case is attach it to a string or to a spindle. This is a spindle here called a kush, right? And used for storing string. So you just take that and attach it to it. Then you get, that way you get a longer stick. And you and you dip it into the water, and then you take it out. And after that, you take off the string or the spindle, and you hold on to the hyssop tree itself, and you sprinkle on the people. So you see here, amai, and yet the pasuk says here that the kohen, you have to take it and dip it. So you have to do an act of taking and dipping. So this Mishnah teaches us that even though you're taking and dipping through an extension and not holding, not touching the hyssop itself, it nevertheless is kosher, is valid, and therefore taking through something through an extension is considered taking. And so too, in this case, if I hold the lulav through a glove, through a handkerchief, that is considered taking and it's kosher. All right, so that's what Rava said. And now we're going to question his proof. Maybe there it's different, because in that case, I take the spindle and I actually attach it onto the hyssop, right? And I attach them together in some way. I tie it together. So then it's all one. Whereas in this case, where I have a handkerchief and I just take the handkerchief and hold the lulav, the handkerchief is not attached to the lulav. And so that would be worse. In other words, it sounds like it would be better for the golden ornaments if they're actually attached to the lulav, so that would be better. But if it's not attached, and it's really not the same as that case, so Rava, sorry, you don't have a good proof. So we'll bring another proof. Nafal mishifoferet lashoket pasul. This proof is also from para aduma, but this is from the preparation of the para aduma. When you prepare it, you got to go get water from that spring, and you put the water into a trough or a little bowl, and then you take the ashes that you had from burning the para, and you pour them into the water. Now, the question is here, let's say it fell, right? As I'm preparing it, I'm trying to open the vial of the ashes, and by mistake, it fell into the water, and I didn't place it there intentionally. The law is no good, right? Right here it says pasul. So what could we infer? Ha-pilohu kasher. So that means if I did it intentionally, and I took this vial, and I knocked it and poured it into the water, then that would be fine. Amai v'lakechu v'natan. But there also the pasuk says I have to take the ashes and place them in the water. And I might think that means I have to take them with my hand and touch the ashes and physically place them in the water and not through a vessel. And yet I just learned from here that the only problem is if it falls unintentionally. But if I had intention, even if I used a vessel, that's still considered that I'm putting it in through the vessel. And so here is Rava's proof that taking something with through an extension is still considered taking. Excellent. Now, Rabba, back to Rabba, he was giving lots of advice before. Here's more. Lo ladus inish lulaba behosha'ana. You should not insert the lulav into the binding of the four species. In other words, let's say you have the adavot and the hadassim bound together, and then you want to put the lulav in after. So you shove the lulav down in. That's not a good idea. You know why? Because as you're shoving it down or making it lower, it's going to rip off the leaves of the hadassim and the adavot. That's a problem not only because now your hadassim won't have so many leaves. If it had an adavot, okay, if it still has a majority of leaves, it could still be okay. The worst problem is that those leaves, now that they're no longer attached to the branch are going to form an interposition, and you're going to have a separation between the hadassim and the lulav and the adavot, and you're not holding them together anymore. And so that's the problem. So don't do that. That's Rabbah. But Rabbah amar min b'mino eno choses. In general, if you have something that's the same species, if you have hadas and hadas leaves, even if the hadas leaves are not attached to it, nevertheless, it's not an interposition because it's of the same species. It's all the same kind. So It's not part of it, but but it doesn't cause a problem. And therefore, I don't know if he's saying this, you should jab it in, but let's say it's sticking out too much and you need to push it down, even if a few leaves come off, Rava says, don't worry about it. Okay, and more advice by Rabba. Lo legozi nishu laba behoshana de mishtayere hutsa bave hasisa. A person should not shorten the lulav by detaching it at the bottom, cutting it at the bottom. In other words, you have a lulav and it had the same all connected, and the lulav is sticking out too much underneath. Opposite problem before. So you want to chop off the bottom of the lulav. The problem with that, the lulav will still be kosher. You can't chop the top of the lulav, but the bottom you can. The problem is that then the leaves that were attached to that bottom are no longer going to be attached to the lulav. And if they're no longer attached, they're going to be an interposition between the lulav and the hadassim and haravot next to them. But Rava says the same thing. So you have the lulav, and then you have more lulav leaves. But even though they're not connected to lulav, they're not an interposition because they're the same species. Okay, and more from Rabba Rabba. Hadas shel misva asur lariach bo, etrog shel misva mutar lariach bo. Okay, this is very interesting. The hadas, you are not allowed to smell it while you're using it for mitzvah, meaning during the holiday. After the holiday, you can. However, etrog that you use for mitzvah, you are allowed to smell it. Now, this is a bit surprising because we always know from when we're little kids, don't smell the etrog, right? Because it's used for a mitzvah, and mitzvot lav lehenot nitnu. We're not supposed to derive personal physical benefit from mitzvot, but rather for their spiritual and educational benefit. So we're not allowed to smell it. And yet here he says, no, you're allowed to smell the etrog. So let's see why. My ta'ama hadas lecha ki aksiye merecha aksiye etrog dalachila ki aksiye machila aksiye. The reason is because the primary benefit you get from the myrtle branch is smelling, and therefore when you set it aside for a mitzvah, you're setting aside the primary benefit of smelling. I'm going to use this for mitzvah, so I'm not going to derive benefit of smelling. That makes sense for the myrtle. Etrog, however, the primary benefit of an etrog is eating it. So when I set it aside for a mitzvah, that means I'm not going to use it for its primary benefit, which is eating. But smelling the etrog is just the secondary benefit. It's a side point. It's ancillary. And therefore, there's no prohibition of smelling the etrog. Okay, so that's very interesting. So why don't we smell the etrog? Why do we make a big deal out of it? The reason is actually a different reason altogether, which is when you smell a beautiful fruit all during the year, you're supposed to say a beracha. Hanoten reach tov ba'perot. You're supposed to say a beracha. The question here is, since this etrog is now used for mitzvah, should we say the beracha? Or do you not say the beracha? And since we're not sure if we smell it, will we say a beracha or not? That's why we're careful not to smell the etrog. But really, from the reason for that it's mukseh, that it's set aside for a mitzvah, that would be permitted. Maybe a nafkamina, I didn't see this inside, but maybe let's say you said that beracha on another fruit, right? You took an orange and you said the beracha on it, and then you said the beracha, and you want to smell the etrog also, so then for sure you wouldn't have to say another beracha. Perhaps in that case, you would be able to smell the etrog. Okay, so that's really nice to know the origin of that law. More advice from him, hadas b'mchubar mutar lariach bo, etrog b'mchubar asur lahariach bo. Now it's not talking about on the holiday, but rather on a Shabbat. Any Shabbat, if you have a hadas, a myrtle that's attached to the tree, attached to the ground, you are allowed to smell it. But if an etrog is attached, you are not allowed to smell it on Shabbat. Why? Because the hadas, the primary purpose of the hadas is for smelling. And so even if you say it's permitted to smell it on Shabbat, you'll go to the branch and you'll smell it and you'll leave it there. You're not going to cut it. There's no reason to cut it. You just smelled it. You're happy. However, etrog, because the main benefit is eating. Therefore, if we allow a person to smell an etrog that's attached to the tree on Shabbat, they're going to go smell it, and they're going to say, oh, this etrog, this smells so delicious, I want to eat it. And then the person might come to cut it off the tree to go and eat it, and that will violate. There's no such the problem with the hadas, because you're not going to eat the hadas. What are you going to do? Smell it? You already smelled it while it's on the tree. There's no need to cut it. So that's the opposite case where the smelling of the etrog is more machmir than the hadas. Okay, v'amar Rabba, and finally, the last piece of advice from him: lulav beyamin ve'etrog b'semol. You should hold the lulav in the right hand and the etrog in the left hand. Doesn't matter if you're righty or lefty. My tama hanetilata misvot v'haychada mitzvah, because the lulav is attached to the hadasim and adavot. So you have 3 mitzvot. So we always want to give the benefit to the right. The right is for most people, the stronger hand, yad chazaka for Hashem too. And so therefore, even though the etrog is a beautiful thing, nevertheless, the 3 outweighs that one beautiful fruit. Another question, how can we say al netilat lulav? Why don't we say al netilat arba aminim, al netilat etrog? Why do we say lulav? Because the lulav is the tallest. So when you go look, you're looking from far, you say, oh, that guy has a lulav because it sticks up from all the other ones. Question, since the etrog is so beautiful, you could just pick it up, right? Pick up the etrog above your head and make it higher than the lulav. And then you could say, al netilat etrog, or ul barich. No, what I mean is that the species, and when it grows, the palm tree is the tallest of all the other trees and bushes, and that's why it stands out, and that's what it's the most prominent, and therefore it's fitting to say the beracha on the lulav, and everybody else who is shorter gets included together with it. All right, it's great to see the original explanations for so many of the things that we do. And we continue on that theme with the next Mishnah. When do we shake the lulav? At what points? The answer is in the Mishnah, Behodu Hashem techila v'asof. The pasuk Hodu Adonai Kitov Ki L'olam Chasto, which appears in the middle of Hallel and at the end of Hallel. We do it in those 2 places. U be'ana Adonai Hoshi'ana, and also in the middle of Hallel, where it says Ana Hashem Hoshi'ana. In the original Pesukim, it only says this once, but when we sing it, we say it twice, and so we shake it both times. And Hoshi'ana, we repeat Hodu. However, we repeat the last Hodu. However, we only shake it in one of them. So altogether, there's 4 Pesukim that we shake it. 2 of them are Hodu, and 2 of them are Ana Hashem Hoshi'ana. Divrei Bet Hillel, which is what we follow. Bet Shammai Omerim, Af Be'ana Ana Hashem Haslihana. Also in the next pasuk after Hoshi'ana, so Haslihana, save us. And we also should shake in there with that pasuk according to Bet Shammai. Amar Rabbi Akiva, so Fehayiti B'Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua, Shekol Ha'am Hayu Mena'anein et Lulevehen, Behem Lo Ninu Ela Be'ana Hashem Hoshi'ana. Here's a story of Rabbi Akiva. He's living after the time of the Bet HaMikdash, but still, early generation. And he says, I saw that the whole nation, everybody that was the populace, they were all shaking their lulavim in Haslichana as well. In other words, they were all following Bet Shammai. However, the 2 great rabbis, Rabban Gamliel, the leader, the Nasi of the generation, Rabbi Yoshua, they did not follow that. They weren't doing what everybody else was doing. They only did it in Hoshi'ana because they were following Bet Hillel. So this is a really fascinating Mishnah and story, because there are a lot of times when there's a popular minhag that goes one way, but the sages and poskim of the generation say that's wrong, it should go another way. And, who wins out? It's not so easy to get a mass population that are used to doing something to shift unless they have great faith in the authority of the sages of their time. So you see that there was at least 1 year, probably a longer amount of time, that the people maybe they got so excited and they did Hoshi'ana too. I don't know why they were following Bet Shammai, whatever reason they were, but ultimately the Nasi, Rabbi Yoshua, they stuck to their guns and they pushed everybody until today. We follow Bet Hillel. Okay, remember in those days, Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai, there was still wasn't totally decided yet that everyone has to follow Bet Hillel. There were many people that followed Bet Shammai, so I was still in transition. Okay, now Gemara, Nu Amanda Char Shemeh. All of a sudden, this Mishnah is asking, where do we wave the lulav? Who said anything about waving? First, tell us that you have to wave, and then ask a question: where do you have to wave? Okay, this is like the first Mishnah in Berachot, right? When do you say Kiryat Shema? First, tell us that you have to say Kiryat Shema before you ask me when you have to say it. All right. Hatam ka'eh kol ulav sheyesh po shelosha tevachim kedei la'ne'a bo kasher. No, we did mention it. You just forgot. It was back in earlier in this perek. It said the minimum size of a lulav is 3 tefachim, enough to shake it. So there you go. See, it mentioned within the size it has to be shaken. We understood that to mean 3 tefachim plus some extra so that you can shake it. So that's where we said it. And now we're following up with this Mishnah saying, oh, we mentioned shaking. When do you shake it? Good. Tenanatam. Okay, this is now a fascinating jump. We're jumping to Menachot, which is describing on Shavuot. We would bring two loaves of bread and 2 lambs, and we would wave them. So this is really fascinating. If you want to think about why do we wave the lulav, we go back and forth and up and down in different directions. What precedent is there for this? The answer is korbanot. Again, right? We saw so many. This is one of the most important and most explicit connections between the lulav and korbanot, that in the Bet HaMikdash, various things were waved, called the tinufa offering. And we are treating the lulav in the same way. So even if you're not a Kohen and you're never going to get to serve in the Bet HaMikdash, right? You have a great merit. Just take a lulav and etrog and wave them, and you're fulfilling the same ritual. So here's a description of what they would do in the Bet HaMikdash on Shavuot. The Kohen has to take the 2 lambs and carry them while they're alive, and put the 2 pieces of bread on top of them. So he holds his hands underneath, and he goes forward and back, and then up and down. So hunaf means to wave. That's the forwards and backwards. And huram means raised up and then brought down. So there you go. That's the Mishnah describing the korban, and we do the same thing. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, molichu mebi lemisha baruchot shelo, ma'aleh morid lemisha shamayim v'aretz shelo. Rabbi Yochanan explains the symbolism regarding the korban, that when you move it to and fro, you're saying that this belongs to to whom the 4 directions belong. God is omnipresent and contains all space, and therefore we go back and forth, indicating the four directions. And then also, even though it looks like he's just doing it this way and that way, but okay, lateral space, and then up and down, and that is for he who is in charge, for whom the heavens and earth are also his. So those are the other directions. Good. That's Rabbi Yochanan. In the West, they said the following. Rabbi Yochanan is also in the West, but okay, another tradition from the West. In this case, this is less of praise of the omnipresent, but this rather is a warding off evil. So you go back and forth to keep away the evil winds, and up and down to keep away the bad dew that comes down. Rather than winds. So, this is the beginning of this is the harvest season and the beginning of the new planting season that they're about to do. And we're praying for good wind and good rain in the upcoming season. So keeping away rain and wind that is destructive. Amar Rabbi Yosef bar Rabin, v'yitem Rabbi Yosef bar Zibila, zot omeret sheyareh So we learned something really interesting, that the remnants of a mitzvah, the non-essential parts, even those can keep away bad things. In other words, the main part of a korban is the blood service, right? Putting the blood on the mizbeach. Taking the animal and waving it is an incidental part. It's not essential. If you didn't do it, still a valid korban. And same as so. Therefore, you see that even though it's not an essential part. Nevertheless, look how effective it is that you do the waving, and that keeps away the bad winds. So we learn that even something non-essential, how much more so, is important to do the essential part of the mitzvah. Waving is non-essential, and yet it keeps away the bad winds and the bad rain. And all that is true regarding lulav also, that you should wave it up, side to front and back, and up and down, and that also has the same symbolism. And we already saw, right, those two symbols. Number one is an acknowledgement of God, who is omnipresent and exists in all directions, and also sending away those rain, the bad rain, and the bad wind. Ravacha bar Yaakov mamtile umaitele amar din gera be'ayna desitna velamirtahi mishum datel igruye be. So Ravacha, he would also bring it forward and back, and he would have a different symbolism in mind. He would say this should be an arrow in the eye of the Satan, almost like the lulav is like a little an arrow, and he's poking it in the eye. But what he means by this is, look how we're all coming and doing this mitzvah. It's not even an essential mitzvah, and we're all gathering together to do it. And now the Yetzer Hara, the Satan, has no power over us, because look how we beautify and enjoy and fulfill this mitzvah with dedication. So that's what he meant. However, the Gemara criticizes him. Says, don't say that. You should never boast about overcoming the Satan, the Yetzer Hara, because you're only tempting fate, basically, and asking for trouble. It's like putting a sign in front of your house, saying, I pay taxes perfectly. The IRS has nothing on me. You don't want to boast that. You don't want the IRS coming and checking to see if they could find anything. And therefore, we should be humble in our performance of mitzvot and say, we hope we do everything the right way, and Yetzer Hara will not come upon us, but not boast about it. So that's some of the symbolism of the lulav. And I'll end with one more, which is that in Roman times, when Romans came back victorious from war, they would take palm trees and march with palm leaves, so that the palm branch was a symbol of victory in war. And there's a midrash that makes a similar connections. It says, after the high holidays, when we were fighting for our lives with Yom Hadin, and we hope that we come out with a good judgment, so too we want to celebrate our victory. How do we celebrate our victory? We march with palm trees. So it's really fascinating midrash that's comparing the Jewish Torah ritual to the Roman ritual. Now, it doesn't mean we didn't get it from the Romans. It's just an interesting coincidence. We always, from the Torah, we're taking palm trees anyway at this time. Since the Romans also add a symbol of victory, the Midrash adds that symbol on to the other symbols that we had over here, that of good rain and of praise of the omnipresent. Is kind of as we're saying words of praise, we're also shaking the different minim that grew during the harvest season, and we're showing we are happy and show gratitude and celebration for all the wonderful growth and food that God provides us in nature. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen v'amen.